everybody. Welcome to another episode of Redefining Society podcast. If you're watching, you may be a little bit thrown off by this because you see Sean is here, and today he's in the role of guest because it's my show, and sometimes I go on his show, so it's kind of fun. A little less pressure, I guess, on your side.
Yeah, I'm just here. I'm freeloading on the session today.
Are you here for the?
I love chatting with Fred, and you happen to be the host of this one, so.
I know. I was gonna say about Fred that you're like at this point returning guest for, I guess, 3-4 times maybe if you count last year RSA.
Yeah.
So familiar face. I love honestly to have returning guests because you already know the style, you already know what they're good at, and even if this time you're not on Redefining Cybersecurity and we're not at RSA conference, we are where we talk about how technology impacts society and hopefully how society impact technology, which is what I really like. And of course, you cannot talk about technology without cybersecurity, and you are an expert in that field. So we all know that Sean is crazy about cybersecurity. He loves cybersecurity, eat, breathe, and I don't know.
I'm crazy.
Drink.
Just leave it at that.
So anyway, this is going to be a lot of fun, and I think it's going to create some questions in people's mind, but also hopefully give some answers and some good tips. So let's start with Fred. Introduce yourself. I know you do so many things that I'm not even going to attempt to cover it. You can do a better job than me.
No, I'm happy to that. Thanks again for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to come back here because it's so interesting sessions, and I think that I always learn a lot from talking to you guys and having your questions pop up. And I really like the name of this podcast. Actually, this week I had a friend telling me he really issued me to leave academia and start up a business, and I'm not going to do that immediately. But he said it, Fred, like what's the purpose of all this research if you're not sure that it's, redefine society? And he literally said those words, right? Like you have to do something, you have to get your research out to the people. And I kind of believe to some degree that happens, but of course there's always a difference between academia and research and industry. And to think about how do what we do reshape society and redefine society. I love that name. And I think I'm pretty excited about where this conversation will lead. I actually don't know it. It's going to be, I think we're going to learn something. But yeah, I'm Fred. I'm just wrapping up my PhD in computer science. I'm also just about after that to start a postdoc at the Harvard Kennedy School, which is a political school over at Harvard. So that's quite exciting. I've been doing computer science for almost all my life, although the last couple of years I've been working a lot with phishing, which implements some psychology. I've been doing some business-oriented stuff and also been trying to investigate what's the actual cost of phishing attacks and how much should organizations spend. That's a very big gray zone right now. We don't know. In the general, bigger sense, we don't know what cybersecurity is truly worth either. I think that's very interesting. What is the real cost of a cyber attack? And this last year, I worked a lot with strategy, a lot with policy, and seeing how do you take these different technological cybersecurity solutions and use them in a way that affects society and helps society, and what should technology use? And there's this trade-off, right? When you start talking to people, the security, operability, or how much are people willing to give up in terms of convenience, for having a secure product, because it's usually not convenient to have a secure product. And these things more and more starts to play into national security. I think that's quite interesting. And yeah, I love these questions. I'm very sort of interested in the turn that my research takes now. So I think that I'll move a little bit closer towards the redefining society way, if you still want to put the label on my direction, and I'm excited about that. So that's where I am, and I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah, and we're gonna dig into again the motivation, how you felt attracted to that as a more technical person. Sean, I know that you're interested in society because I made you interested in society, as you made me interested in
I dragged you into
cybersecurity.
cyber, and you made me think about other.
Well, what do you expect from this conversation, Sean?
I expect to change the world.
There you go.
No, I think in all seriousness, I think just the idea. I mean, when we founded the magazine, ITSPmagazine, we brought together the technology and the cybersecurity and how it impacts how we live, work, and vice versa. So for today, I think I'm going to, what I look at is business operations primarily, right? How do businesses run with security and privacy in mind, but not in a way that impacts growth and revenue, but in a way that generates money and trust in their user base and customer base. So it's that latter part, right? The users and the customers that I'll bring to this as well. Maybe not just communities, but users of technologies who happen to be communities, but also members of or employees of companies, partners of companies, things like that. So I don't know.
And it all comes
I'm always
together.
excited to chat with Fred, as I said. So.
It all comes together. I think this is the perfect setup for this conversation, right? You can't just get something and put it in silos, which is terminology we use a lot in cybersecurity. We realize that everything is synergic. There is synergy between what we do, what we invest, what we develop, the way we grow, and you can't just do it because of the money, although unfortunately money is what also found research as well. So we got to find the balance there. We need another society, the other society, which we can go into what the goal of that is. But, a society that actually cares, I think, about. And the question that your friend asked you, Fred, why we do all this, right? So why don't we start there? Why that was such an important question for you and how you like this redefining society concept?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing I really like that you guys said just a couple of minutes ago is that it's not just about how technology changes society, right? It's about how society changes technology. And a while ago, we discussed a little bit on this podcast one of the studies I do where we compare a lot of different countries' national cybersecurities, which is quite interesting. Most modern countries have an official strategy, which is a document that entails their sort of political ambitions to work with cybersecurity. And I've been working a lot with these strategies and the policymakers who creates them during the past years. And one thing that we learned there, and I was quite curious to find this out, what are these documents? And one thing you learn is that they are, in every sense of the word, sort of a product of society shaping technology. Like these documents, if you look at the American cybersecurity strategy or the Japanese cybersecurity strategy, they're different, not just on technical levels, but you can see the political differences in the countries by analyzing these strategies. And I think that's quite cool, because what that means in practice, and these documents are actually used, right? They really affect the cyber climate of the country, and the political culture, the society is affecting the way we work with cybersecurity, which is very interesting. I briefly mentioned this before, but for example, we can see that Japan's entire cybersecurity strategy, the motivation for them to even create it to some degree was to protect the vulnerable people. Like they really wanted to know that everyone, they have the term cybersecurity for all, and that's what cybersecurity is for them to some degree. It's a big question, but you can say that. And if you look, for example, in the US, we have an enormous protection of critical infrastructure, of large businesses, almost no mention about elderly and vulnerable populations. And that doesn't come from technical limitations, right? That comes from just sort of political strategies, and they come from something else that affects cybersecurity. I think this is incredibly interesting, because when you look into these things, as you said before too, cybersecurity research, of course, it's the backbone of this money and grants. And those grants often come from governmentally tied organizations. And I think these sort of high-level political thoughts and strategies and philosophies of how the country should be run, they take a lot of different shapes. And one of those shapes is cybersecurity. And by analyzing these high-level strategies, you can also see that, maybe the reason that there are so many successful online scams that hurts a lot of people, for example, in the US, but around the world, is that these vulnerable people don't receive the same rigorous support in terms of cyber as, for example, critical infrastructure. And of course, to some degree, that makes sense, right? We need to protect our power plants and so forth. But it would be good, I really believe, if it was a better way, a more clear way for everyone, especially citizens that are not so tech savvy, to learn about scams, to know that if someone hacked me, there's a clear, everyone knows who to call if there's a fire in the house, but everyone doesn't know who to call if someone hacks them. And I think that these questions really interest me, and how can you sort of convert. We have a lot of really good technical solutions, but how do we spread them to ensure that everyone can be part of them? I think it's very interesting.
So I tend to look at it, of course, every country has a different culture, which drives what they care about most. And in the Japanese example, the society does take a top spot in what they care about, right? Having respect for each other and taking care of each other. I look at it from a business perspective, and I don't know, maybe if the U.S. approaches things from a business perspective. So how can we grow the GDP? How can we keep the deficit down? How can we help companies and individuals grow and succeed in their careers and in life? Where we really push. I mean, we have patent offices and all these things that really push for innovations. We have a market that drives and supports first to market and innovations that may push the limits on what safe is. And so I'm just wondering how I don't know if it's the market or the culture changes some of this stuff. Because when we look at a business, oftentimes the culture and the values of the business drive how they build products, how they deliver services, how they treat their employees, how they interact with their customers. Do they take a privacy first approach, or do they just collect everything? And it's a tough balance, I think. And I guess, how do we list it all? How do we prioritize it all? Do some countries not list it all? They just focus on what they think is right and leave other stuff that they haven't thought about off the table. Yeah, so those are my thoughts.
The answer to that question is we don't know.
I know.
We don't know.
A + B, Z.
So here's what is interesting. I'm reading a book about the history of humanity. Really cool book. Maybe I'll put it in the note. And when you get to the capitalism part that drives Western Europe in the 1700 and up, it's grew by the idea of capitalistic society, right? That the growth is the objective. So you reinvest the money, Adam Smith, The Wealth of the Nations, and you create wealth because you do that, not just because they're greedy, but because you're making society better. Like if everybody is more rich, everybody can enjoy life more. If there is more research, people can live longer and all of that. Now, some people, I think they do it with the right idea in mind, often the researcher, the scientist. But the money comes from people that want to make money. So there is a lot to think right there to what drives innovation, I think. But I think we're at the point that the change into society is so big in terms of technology, with artificial intelligence and all the advanced technology we have now, that I think we're at that point where we need to reestablish how we do things again. I don't know, Fred, am I mumbling or you see something here?
No, I think this is super interesting. And it's also, I think it's difficult to have this conversation without sort of digressing and pivoting away a little bit. But I recently had a long conversations with a bunch of folks from the AI community about artificial intelligence and capitalism. And I think that's quite interesting, right? Because when you start, and it's relatively tied to computer security in the sense that everything sort of relates to these topics in the context of scaling up technology and security. And the role of capitalism is very interesting in this, because there are a few, like obviously for my sake, I moved from Sweden to the United States, and I'm quite a big believer in capitalism, because otherwise I wouldn't have moved here. But when you start looking at the sort of underbelly of these things, you see some trends. And for example, with labor replacement, which is a big sense in the AI communities these days, and what happens when we replace a lot of human jobs. And it's interesting again, and this comes back to how society shapes technology. Because when you create, for example, AI models, you create them to a large degree based on some sort of a capitalistic undertone, right? And that's how they're used, and they're used to profit maximize. And whatever you say, there's a lot of stories from all these companies, but you create products profit maximize. You almost always do that, right, in a capitalistic society. And is that ideal when you talk about super intelligence? And that's a little bit of a leap away from computer security, but I think it's quite related here, because a large part of my research is also controlling the AI models, and see that's a big, and also that in all these, of course, national cyber strategies, a large part of them is emerging technology these days. And how do we ensure that we're secure against tomorrow's AI models and other schemes? And I think that's quite interesting, and it gets a little bit vague when you talk about these things, but it's also very interesting to see, because again, when you have, you talk about developing super intelligence in a large case, and then you task security people with protecting us against that super intelligence, and in a larger case, protecting society against that. And I think it's very interesting, because in a way you create something with the sole purpose, not the sole purpose, but with a strong purpose of profit maximization that will very obviously benefit a few owners incredibly much. And how do you secure that and ensure that society benefits and is sort of shaped in a good way? And it's almost like society shapes the way we create these technologies, and then these technologies shape society, and it's a self-fulfilling sort of prophecy or loop. Whereas if you had another context, I mean, you can imagine a thought experiment with another type of society with different values and different principles, and maybe in that society, technology would be created in a bit of a different way. Models would be trained in a different way, used in a different way, created for different purposes. That would create another loop. And I think these things are quite interesting, because we live in an exponential curve, right? It goes very, very quickly. And like when you live in an exponential curve, there's a lot of change, and decisions you take have a lot of consequences a couple of decades or even years down the road. And that's an incredibly vague answer to your question. It was already a little bit vague, but I think that's my 2 cents on this.
Yeah, I don't. You've said it a couple times now that society's creating the technology, and maybe in some countries that is the case, but I really feel that there's one or two big companies, one or two individuals, perhaps even, that have strong views and on what they want to accomplish, right? And we can look at Amazon and the SpaceX group of companies, and the things they're investing in are very broad and wide and covering large swaths of how we live our daily lives. And in underneath that is so I think companies and people that run those companies are defining what's being built for the sole purpose of making them money, thinking that they are doing hopefully something good for the society. Then underneath that is the innovation of the technology that pushes things further, maybe even beyond the views of the people at the top, be it an individual or an executive team. And I think the technology is pushing things even further. And in both of those cases, I don't see individuals having a say in it. I think we're tossed new products and features that we're even forced to use if we want to gain a benefit from technology and products and features, that we don't really have a say. At least we don't think we have a say. So I guess my position is I don't think society is defining technology. I think technology is forcing society to adhere to what a small number of folks want.
So I really agree with that. And let me redefine what I said. So I think we're actually saying the same thing, but what I'm saying, if you want to rephrase it a little bit better, is that a part of society defines technology. Because again, these, let's say, large companies, they are society, but they're not the whole of society. They're a small part of society. And it is actually a very important distinction that you make, right? That a part of society, a small part, a very small part, is creating technology for all of society. And that's quite interesting. And that's it's very important to make it clear, as you do, that a minimal, actually, part of society creates technology for the big part. And as you mentioned, that can be good, right? In a lot of ways, that has created, also as you, Marco, mentioned before, it's created a lot of benefit in the last 200-300 years. There's a lot of things that's a lot better in society. But there is also, just to play with these thoughts, again, just to throw out concept. But if you look at terms such as labor displayed. I mean, capitalism is fantastic as long as people are useful, right? But if people are not useful, which a lot of good folks believe that people will not be useful for the concept of profit generation for so much longer. And if they're not, then that's quite interesting, right? Because what happens with the world then, and what happens with security then, and with there's far bigger topics than cybersecurity in these contexts. And I think, I think that's interesting questions.
Wow, I'm really loving this conversation. I feel like I'm home. No, but the truth, I feel like that when you presented this alternative view between the society driving versus few driving, the point is that I think you're both right. There is both into play, because again, it's all a synergy of things, and one cannot exist without the other. Now, a lot of people say that the consumers as a society make decision, because if they don't buy the product, then that product is not valuable anymore, and that company that makes it, maybe it's going to go out of business. But I think that when you reach a certain level of the size of a company that you don't even know where they're investing anymore, I don't think that the failure of a product is going to make the failing of a company. So here can go a little bit of economic philosophy maybe in this conversation. But I spoke to someone one time that in his opinion, the solution for a better technology is to actually have a smaller company that are innovating instead of few large company that do innovate. Now, maybe somebody's going to call me a socialist right now, or a Marxist or whatever, even if they don't know what it means. But the point is, it doesn't mean that we need to let this company become this incredible monster that then in the end will make the decision for us. I feel like sometimes the everyday person doesn't have a choice. And that's a problem.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? And that's something we actually analyzed that quite a bit lately in terms of incentive structures for different ways for nations to work with incentive alignments in terms of computer security. And one way, as you mentioned, is to try to incentivize consumers to buy secure products. There's usually a premium. You need to pay a good chunk of extra money to have a secure IP camera instead of a normal IP camera. And there are unfortunately a lot of cases where you buy a secure product, but you're still able to hack that product. So it's not always, I guess you don't always know what you're paying for, but I think we haven't really cracked that yet. There's a lot of certification schemes where you have this secure, cybersecure product certification, and I think that's good. I kind of like the food metaphor. If you go and buy something at the store, there are all these labels and certification for having food that is there's some amount of check to make sure that food is healthy. Way more so in Europe than the US, but even here in the US we have that, and there's a good parallel there, right, to security, and see that if we know that there's a label on this product, so we know it's secure or it's gone through all these tests, then it's probably going to be a bit more likely to buy it. But certifications, especially in the context of computer security, is panacea or solve all solution either. It can be the case, and there's a lot of criticism saying exactly this, that if you have a certification, then companies will always optimize to just pass the certification rather than creating a secure product, right? They do the minimum effort in that case, and that might be good because at least they need to do something. But there are other ways too. As you said, if in a perfect world, if every user care 100% about cybersecurity, so they always buy secure products. If they're an insecure product, they're not going to buy it. That would be good, and then companies would be incentivized to create really secure products. But that's almost the saying is if everyone bought healthy food, no one would sell unhealthy food. But that's not just how it works, because there's a common trend of just taking the shortest path and saving a few dollars, to get a cheaper product.
Or there could be the people that just cannot afford the more expensive product. So you either bring down the price and everybody get the good food, or everybody in this case get the secure product. But
that's the thing.
Well, so toward the beginning, and I know it was on one of the points we wanted to touch on, but you talked about, let's say underrepresented, but vulnerable folks, right? And I know there are, for people that can't see well or blind or even just colorblind, people that can't hear well or at all, there are laws, I think certainly at some state level, perhaps some federal level. I'm not too versed in it all, but I know that there are things that we do to say you can't just hit the 90% of the market and ignore folks with disabilities, right? Because you don't want to serve them. So I don't know, it's not a direct security falls in the same category, but I'm just wondering if there's something to be learned from this, where we can say we're all vulnerable, right? We all have this flaw to fall for scams. Why are we not doing something to help folks? And maybe there's a scale for all the elderly folks who aren't as tech savvy, or I don't know. But I guess my point is we seem to have some answers for some things. The example I'm talking about now is government driven. I don't necessarily know that we need to do that, but I think we seem to find solutions to these problems, but this one we just keep talking about it a lot and can't seem to unlock the code on it.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. And I think, unfortunately, to some degree, what you say is just due to the way the market is shaped. I don't think the market have to be shaped this way, but I talk with a lot of companies who have a lot of these various scam protection and security solutions, and a lot of them solely focus towards B2B, business to business sales. Because of course the big money is in making a big sale to companies, but that makes sense because they spend a lot of time and energy developing these various solutions to perhaps train people to be more secure or more sophisticated scam detection systems. And I think that it would be good if there was a bigger support, and hopefully eventually the market will adjust itself, right? The same way we have, most systems have firewalls and so forth since a very long time ago, because the private people would need that as well. At some point implicitly they demanded that, and that was required. But yeah, we don't have that with scams. We don't have that with cyber insurances for private people. It's often, a lot of this is just due to there's just a shortage of information, and also there's a shortage of really good decentralized local law enforcement resources and competence into dealing with these sort of low-level cyber issues. And I think, for example, in the US, it's pretty good response now. If you're a big company and you get hit by a ransomware attack, you can usually get pretty good help by the FBI or so forth. But if you're a private person who there's a pretty good scam and you fall for it and you lose a good chunk of your savings or other things, then it's less clear how you will get assistance from that, and how people will try to find the people who did that to you. Of course, we're working on that, but I think it's just not there yet in the sense of how protected people should be.
Yeah, and I like this quickly, Marco, because I also think about, I've been doing this for 30 years, and at the beginning of a lot of the creation of the cybersecurity market, where antivirus became a thing, and then it exploded to all the stuff we have now. I guess the point is we've created a market to solve a problem that we didn't solve initially in the creation of the technology. And I guess we can look at it in a parallel for physical security, right? There's security patrols and community security services and things like that do the same thing. So there's markets for cameras, security cameras and security patrols and all that kind of stuff. And so I guess it's a one-to-one physical to digital. But the question I'm thinking about is, we have the mitigating systems in place because we either don't have the proper laws or the enforcement of the laws or the responsibility for those who break the law or allow the technology to be broken against the law.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if there's something in the work that you've done from the national policy perspective that says some countries actually have better laws and better enforcement and better responsibility positions, and and things to help kind of balance things out on that end of it, so that there's less of a need for the mitigating market end of things.
That's an incredibly good point. I think one thing of a problem here, I should say, and that's sort of common across the board against a lot of nations, is that in cyber, attribution is very difficult, right? If someone hits you with a cybercrime, there's so many ways, both for big attacks and for small attacks, but there's so many ways these criminals can, first of all, just hide their traces, right? It's less obvious who did the attack. And it's so common in these attacks that you find a group from one country, and then they kind of spoofed their attack methods. For example, Russian hackers trying to look like North Korean hackers, and then you think that you attribute the attack to North Korea, but it turned out to be Russia, and so forth and so forth. And it's really tricky. And as you said, it's not just, obviously with just normal crime, it's really hard to find the person who did a crime, right? But you can, and we have really good police officers who try to do this, and detectives and so forth. And we have cyber detectives too, to use that language, but it's just way more difficult. And yeah, there are different national approaches. For example, again, these sort of correlates to the political structure of the country. And Singapore is well known for having way more of an authoritative philosophy than, for example, many Western countries have. And they have a way stronger surveillance culture, which is quite interesting because, yeah, that surveillance culture makes it a bit more convenient to try to stop criminals before they can perform cyber attacks, and when cyber attacks have happened, they have a stronger chance to catch them. But even there, it's difficult, right? Because it's global. It's not the same as if you go and you rob your local supermarket, because then you have to be there in person, and it's way easier to find them. But the fact that this is a global phenomenon is very, very difficult to achieve attribution. If you can't achieve attribution and penalize people, then of course people are not going to stop.
So here's the thought as we go towards the end, and I kind of want to open the artificial intelligence can, but I don't think we have the time for that. So maybe you come back and we talk about that. But I'm kind of going into, weirdly, in a weird way for me, unusual, in a positive view of the future, based on what you guys have said. Because I tend to get dystopian and create this fantasy world where everything goes to shit. Sorry for the French. But in this case, you make me think like, we're still relatively in an early stage of the cybersecurity industry. And I know a lot of people say that. And even the internet itself, and now AI. But I feel like I'm running parallel in my head with other things that happened in the past. And it comes from Fred, you bring in the security in real world, or how we are reopening case now that, cold cases for 20, 30 years ago, where you can still access the DNA of the person incriminated, and then you find out that it's not really the person that did the crime, which sucks. But, the technology is bringing us to a point then we can now resolve certain things that 30, 40, 50 years ago we couldn't. Jack the Ripper, we still don't know who is. We probably, if it did it now, we would have found it because the cameras and because all of that in London, right? Yeah. So my point is, I'm kind of optimistic that cybersecurity will get better, and maybe will access and protect everybody without expecting everybody to learn how to protect themselves. I don't know in how long, but I think AI is probably going to help on that. So sure, a comment on AI based on what I said.
I think that's that's an incredibly good point, and actually I'm happy to maybe link that in the end notes. I wrote an article in Harvard Business Review earlier this year about this very topic, about how AI benefits attackers and defenders, and it's quite context dependent, but you have a really good point. And in the term of protecting systems, hardware and software and so forth, I do believe that AI will help defenders potentially way more than they help attackers for a few reasons. And one of these reasons is that a lot of the cyber attacks we see now, especially the big attacks, they are very complex, but they also almost always utilize a few low-hanging fruits. There's perhaps some really poor security settings. Devices aren't configured properly. And even these really big attacks that cost billions of dollars in damage, they are enabled by a few really poor security settings. And I think a big reason why these poor security settings or these poorly secured devices exist is that, again, there's a shortage of skilled labor in cybersecurity. We don't have time to test all the devices and to perform as many security assessments as we would like to do. And I do believe that, of course, attackers going to use AI to launch a lot of cyber attacks, but defenders will also use it. And if defenders use it to increase the sort of lower bar of cybersecurity, I think that's going to benefit the society a lot. And I'm quite optimistic to that. The flip side is when it comes to scamming people and hacking, humans. Then I do believe that AI benefits attackers more than defenders, because AI makes it far cheaper for hackers to launch different scams. But we can't patch the human brain, right? It's not the same. So with systems, we're just going to patch all our systems. That's very, very good. With humans, the attackers are getting this fantastic new shiny attacking toolbox. But humans, you can use AI to train humans, and you can use AI for spam filters, and that's great. But old AI models are already really good at spam filters. But large language models, which is this other type of AI, it's only sort of incrementally enhances the spam filters from what we had before, but it almost exponentially enhances the capability of attackers. So short summary is that protecting technical defense systems, AI is great. It benefits defenders more. Protecting human users from scams and so forth, then AI is not so good and it benefits attackers more, according to me.
Well, I have loads of thoughts as a closing. So I recall a conversation we had with Charity Wright, and the concept that we'll see not just an internet, but many internets. And to me, that says many networks. And what I take that to is the ability to use technology in a way with purposeful for the thing we're trying to accomplish, purposeful with the group we're trying to accomplish it with, and therefore it's still connected globally, but more isolated in different groups. And so I think the technology is there to allow for us to kind of protect ourselves. I know there's like identity technologies and a lot of Web3 stuff, and how we manage our data, who owns the data, those types of things are coming, where I see we have a better chance to protect ourselves, connect ourselves to only the things we want, bring attribution to the conversations, interactions we have with each other, be it people or machines. And so I see a future where the technology allows for us to have a safer place that's still global, but probably more finite in terms of the groups that we're part of and connect with.
Yeah, I think that's it's a beautiful way to put it, and I like that.
Well, I like the fact that we had this conversation. I like the fact that I have more questions in my head than when we started, which is a good thing, as I always tell to the audience. Even now, at the end of in the final bumper, the outro of the Redefining Society, that's exactly what I say. It's we need to question everything. We just cannot assume that, even to go back, Fred, to the label on the product, maybe that company made the minimum effort just to meet the label and maybe could have done something better. So we are the one that needs to really read through and realize, think, questioning everything. It's kind of like, we have to think. Sometimes we don't have the time, and so we rely on technology to stop, the scam or the spam filter. And I'm sure they're gonna get better. I'm sure AI is gonna get into that game as well. And I don't know. I feel like the cybersecurity community is doing a great job. Yeah, it's definitely driven by money. But I think there is good people that are driven by wanted to do something for society as well. And it's always been like that. It's always been like that, and that's part of who we are. So, Sean, thank you for stopping by. I can't wait.
Thanks for letting me crash the party.
Show. Yeah, of course. It's Mi Casa Su Casa, and it's ITSPmagazine. And Fred, always so great to have you. From computer science to political science, I love this Renaissance man, thinking from many different perspectives, which is what we love to do.
Yeah,
For everybody
fantastic.
else, stay tuned, subscribe to Redefining Society, to the YouTube channel for ITSP Magazine, and I'm sure there'll be many more conversation, probably also with Fred. Happy to have you back.
I'm sure there will be. I would love to come back. Thanks for having me again, and it's been great as always.
Very cool. See ya. Thank you.
Take care.